Erin, 2 years ago, there's no way that you could have sat there with the knife without having intrusive, unwanted thoughts, maybe about stabbing me. Here you are 2 years later, and it doesn't look like the knife is triggering you at all. Like you were way over here with fear and avoidance behaviors, and now you're over here. And I think that's thanks to two things, your medication and your experience with exposure and response prevention. So how does it feel to get your life back? Because that's what we always say about ERP. You want your life back. So how are you feeling today, 2 years later?
It saved my life. Like you said, those two elements, the medication and doing the ERP, it saved my life. It really did. It changed my world. I got my quality of life back.
Welcome, Erin. It's so nice to see you today. Thanks for coming. We met in the summer of 2024. You came to one of my support and skills group. And I found out a few weeks later that you had written this book that we're here to talk about today. As soon as I found out that you had this book published, I ordered it from Amazon. I got it right away. I read it in 2 days, and I must say it's amazing. So thank you so much for being here so that we can talk about your personal journey with OCD. Your book is kind of split into two parts. Your personal journey as a person with lived experience with OCD, and then the academic part of it where you're actually educating the reader about what OCD is and what it isn't, which is so amazing. And you're from Edmonton. So welcome. How about if we go back to March of 2023? Reading in the book, I understand that you and your husband were watching a program. And can you tell us about what was happening that evening during that program?
Yeah, Janet, thank you for having me. I'm so honored and humbled that you bought my book. You are a leader in the OCD community, so it means a lot that I'm sitting down here today with you. And so to go back a couple years ago, and we're in March, and it was 2 years ago this month that I was going through a crisis. And what was happening was I was having intrusive, unwanted thoughts that were going 100 miles an hour, it seemed like. And all I could think about was how I was going to harm my husband, or the urge and the want to slit my husband's throat with a knife. And we were watching the show, and I was dissociating from the show because the thoughts were overtaking that, right? So I couldn't focus on anything but the distress and the anxiety of what might happen. And so I actually got my husband to pause the show, and I told him what was happening. And I said, I'm having these intrusive thoughts. And for a moment, I'll just say that he knew that like this hadn't been the first time that this had happened. This was just the night that it had gotten very bad. And I told him that all I could think about was his throat. And I said, I just need to touch your throat. And he was like, okay. And we're sitting about this far apart on the couch. And I said, I think it will help like bring my distress down. So I turned away and I closed my eyes because it felt so real. And it felt like if I had looked at him that I was going to do something more, or the urge to choke him or do something more harmful would happen. And so I did that. I reached over, I squinted and closed my eyes, and I talk about this in the book. And I touched his neck, and it felt like nails on a chalkboard. That's what it felt like to me, you know, that wincing sort of feeling. And I think it was my body's way of processing sort of that urge, I guess, or that compulsion. And so after that, I pulled away and we both looked at each other, and I kind of took a breath and I thought, okay. So he was like, okay. And he was kind of just, you know, watching out. And then we started the show again. And I just circled back like wildfire, and it just continued to loop and loop and loop. The thoughts were looping like just as fast as they were coming in. Kind of like waves at the beach, right? It was just like coming in. There was no way to sort of switch track at this point for me and turn those thoughts off. And so the rest of the show, that's all I could think about. But I will say my distress level did come down a little bit. The show is over. We are getting ready for bed. Okay, I'm brushing my teeth and it's getting worse again. So it's like, it seemed to be okay after I did the exposure, or I guess trying to, engage in a compulsion for short-term relief. I'm brushing my teeth, and now the thoughts are turning into more of a plan. So that's what started to really frighten me and really scare me. And I of course never wanted to harm my husband or anybody. It's not who I am, and that's what OCD is. It'll take anything from you, and you know that. We've discussed that at one of your programs before. So so there I am brushing my teeth, and I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do. So what will I do to kill my husband, right? So those are the thoughts. And it's just so terrifying that like I'm sweating so much that it's just like uncontrollable in my body, feeling it viscerally everywhere. So I tell my husband, he's brushing his teeth in the other bathroom, and he was like, you're like, you need to stop, like not like in a mean way. He was just like, this is hurting you way too much. Like, you're not gonna, you said you don't want to harm me. Like, I believe you don't want to harm me. Like, this is hurting you way too much. And I just said, like, I can't stop it. Like, I can't. So, and I said, and he's like, well, what is it that's happening? And I said, I feel like the urge is so strong right now to grab one of the kitchen knives, and it's like I'm thinking of the knife, and it's the one that I used most often, or the one I tried not to use, because this sort of built up, right? So I started to avoid knives. And this was the night that I experienced my first full avoidance, I guess, of the trigger with a knife. So what proceeded to happen after that was that I did tell my husband. I said, I want to, because he had asked me what I would do, and I said, the plan would be, and it's detailed, I would grab a knife from the knife block from our kitchen, and I would slit your throat while you were sleeping. And it feels so real, and I didn't have the language at the time, right? About
So at the time you didn't know that this was harm OCD showing up?
No.
Okay,
no,
so you didn't know it was OCD?
No, I did not at all. I didn't have that language. I didn't know. And so I thought if I thought about the knife, if I thought about these triggers, that I was actually like capable of killing and being a serial killer. And if I thought about that it meant that I was one. If I watched a show about horror or anything, so I completely avoided those things, but I didn't know that that's what it was. I truly believed that I was a bad person. So we called Access 24/7, and that's a local addictions and mental health crisis line in Edmonton. And I had actually seen a psychiatrist the day before, because the OCD symptoms were so severe that my mom said, I think you need to see somebody, this is like not normal. Well, she said you're not sleeping. I hadn't slept in like 5 days. The stress was just eating me away. And so I had seen a psychiatrist, and that was my first official diagnosis of OCD. So that was just the day before, but I still did it. The appointment was so quick, and I didn't really know. I was like, okay, so I have OCD, but I didn't know what any of that meant yet, right? Because the thoughts had been taking over. So I didn't have any time to engage in what that was, or to look up information about what that might be or what that might look like. So I was prescribed some medication for sleep, because I hadn't slept in 5 days. And so access 24/7, the distress line. My mom said, I phoned my mom sobbing, and I just told her, like, this is what I'm thinking of doing, right? And exactly what I told my husband I was thinking of doing. So she said, you need to call access 24/7. I'm going to call your sister, because my sister lives in Edmonton. My mom lives outside of Edmonton. And she said she's good in these situations. She knows a little bit more. So I'm going to call her, and you get on the phone right away. So I did. And the nurse was very good. And they suggested that I take the sleeping pills that the psychiatrist had prescribed the day before. And because I was running on such little sleep at this point, I was really, I guess I want to say, delusional maybe, or in a state of, severe sleep deprivation. So, but I almost didn't trust myself to go to sleep. It was like the thought, like it was just that it wouldn't stop. It was just like knife from the kitchen, come back to the bedroom, slit his throat. That's all it was. Yeah. That's all it was on replay.
You must have been so terrified.
Oh, it was an absolute nightmare. It was the worst. It was the lowest in my life. And I mean, I can't believe that I'm sitting here today in recovery and have dug myself out of that hole. But to go back to that night for a quick moment, access 24/7, the nurse said, so she cleared that we weren't in immediate danger, because she knew that I had no intention or no want, there was no motivation, right, behind wanting to actually kill my husband with a knife from the kitchen. She did suggest, though, we do some problem solving, because I was so adamant to go to the hospital, and she said, it's 11 o'clock at night. Wait times across the city and the zone are like 6 hours plus. So you're going to be there overnight, no sleep again. So Erin, you'll be going into 6 days without sleep. So if you feel like you need to go. And she said, and I said, I just don't trust that I can go to sleep and with the knives. And she said, okay. So she said, could we do some problem solving in this moment? And I was like, yes, like anything. And so she suggested that I take my sleeping pill and that my husband remove the knives from the house, because they were causing so much distress at the time. So that's what we did. In 20 minutes, he left. I talked with her on the phone. I didn't know where they were. He just got rid of them. Instantly brought my distress down. And of course, in the short term, in that moment, that was the right decision to do, just because it was so stressful. Right. But later in treatment, I would learn that, of course, that's avoidance. And that's just a short-term way to decrease stress, right? It wasn't going to be the long-term solution to come head-to-head with the OCD. So that was the night. And so I took the sleeping pill, and we got off the phone. We both went to bed. I got a couple hours of sleep, and I was woken up by just like a tremor in my body. And I was hoping that I had at least gotten 5 or 6 hours of sleep. And it was about 3.5 hours. It was 3:30 in the morning. And it was a very superficial sleep. I didn't feel rested. And it just started again. So I just laid there, and I just tried to stay calm, practice some mindfulness, detach from it a little bit. And the OCD, when I say detach from it, the OCD and the incoming thoughts, right? Like I was trying to just stay calm. My first, what I wanted to do was wake my husband up and, create this whole thing again with me. But he had to be up early in the morning for work, and he was already sleep deprived from this buildup, right? So he needed to be, he has a job where he needs to be on, right? So that wasn't really something I wanted to do. And I knew that everybody needed rest, because I knew I needed longer term intervention. So I knew, and I didn't phone my mom. I wanted to so bad at 3:30 in the morning. I withheld, and I just knew that the next day I would need all hands on deck essentially for support. So I did go in and out of sleep a little bit, and I think that was due to some of the medication that helped me get a little bit of sleep, but I was so far gone from sleep. In the morning, I waited 8:30. I knew my mom gets up at 8:30. She eats breakfast, does some exercises. My husband had already gone off to work. And I showered. It was so hard. It felt like every time I went to go do something, it was like, am I going to hurt like there was nobody in the condo. And I thought, am I going to hurt someone? Just simply going in to have a shower, right? And it was never about harming myself. It was other people, right? But I wanted to go to the hospital clean and showered. So I had a shower and then got ready, phoned my mom as soon as the clock was at 8:30. And I phoned her and I just started crying. I said, Mom, it's just not stopping. And she said, Sweetie, I think you need to go to the hospital. I'm coming right now.
So at that point, did they get it right in emergency? Because sometimes there's a big misunderstanding about intrusive unwanted thoughts. Did they actually then corroborate the diagnosis of OCD at that point in Emerge?
No. So when the triage nurse took the information, they didn't really get into the details. They just put a wrist on me, or a wristband. And but by the time I had actually gotten in to see the Emerge doctor, it took quite a while to get to that point. So we had been there 12 hours. So this was again late at night by the time that they called my name to go back. And I had been into an emergency room before, and I was sort of expecting what the Emerge in the back looks like, but it was very different where I went. It was like we just veered to the right, the lights got low, there was very minimal things going on, and I had now reached psychiatric territory.
So ultimately, it was a 30-day admission, and it sounded like it was a pretty positive experience for you. You received good care, they found the right medication, and ultimately there was a discharge plan. Can you tell us about what happened after you left the hospital? Because it's a big, important part of the book, the actual therapy that you received when you left hospital. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the March 29th, actually, 2 years ago, that we finally got to my medication regimen that started to actually work. And I could feel the decrease of intrusive thoughts go down. So that was one key component, right? And I started to feel it. And I remember it was the 29th, and I journaled a lot when I was in hospital. And I laid there in the bed and I just was like, I smiled for the first time. And I don't know how long. It was months. It was probably years. Like looking back, it was, years looking in hindsight now that I look back. This had been building up for years. And probably in my childhood, when we look at some of the other order and symmetry sort of OCD and things needing to be just right, aside from the harm or aggressive violence OCD.
So the harm topic showed up in your 30s, but as you connect the dots and you look back, the symptoms actually started in childhood, which is pretty normative for my clients.
That's right. Yeah, and you mentioned that when I sat down with you before, and I've read that, and that's what the literature says as well. So I definitely knew. I just didn't really know. I'm on medication.
So the medication is helpful for you, and thank you for telling us about that, because a lot of my clients are quite opposed to taking medication, and we know that medications for OCD is a gold standard treatment.
Right.
The other gold standard treatment that's a big part of your book is about exposure and response prevention, the B part of CBT.
Yeah.
And you were most fortunate as an Edmontonian to go to an OCD group that technically doesn't exist now. It's changed.
That's right.
So you were there every Friday for how many weeks?
For 12 weeks.
12 weeks. And that's a big part of the book. And I think exposure and response prevention is not well, it's kind of misunderstood out there, just like the OCD is, because it's counterintuitive and paradoxical. And so there you are having these radioactive, intrusive, unwanted thoughts with the harm topic directed at aggression towards your husband. So can you tell us what you learned every Friday in these groups and what some of your exposure therapy looked like?
Yeah. So when I was in hospital, and I attended groups every single day, like I'd mentioned, right? Saw the occupational therapist, did different activities for focus, right? Sustained focus. Can she sustain a focus and do this activity, meet with other people and do group stuff? And I actually tried to resist leaving because I got so comfortable with my stay and the care and I talk about it in the book where the rec therapist and the OT say you're ready to leave. You have a life to live beyond these walls, and not many people have the support that you have. I don't know where the stars were aligned or whatever happened for me, but I was seeing the psychologist following treatment, following hospital, being discharged. And she said, Erin, so there's this group or whatever, and they're like, it's an OCD group. She's like, I'm not an OCD specialist. I know we've been touching on these, on some of your, OCD obsessions and compulsions. Do you want me to put in a referral? And it was kind of just very like casual. It wasn't like, oh my God, there's this group. Like she didn't really know a whole lot about it. So I was just like, okay. Like I was just like, I didn't say no to anything. Like I was just going to do whatever it took. Like I was motivated, and that's 90% of what you're going to get out of it, right? Is what you put into it, and you have to be motivated. So I was resistant still though. While I was motivated and wanted help and I knew about cognitive behavioral therapy. I didn't know about exposure response prevention. So I knew that I was probably going to learn something, but I was very hesitant. And I remember self-talking on the way home, driving from following the psychologist appointment. And she's like, so she put the referral in. She said, you'll hear from them. And it's not for a couple more months. This was August. It would be October when it would start. And so I'm driving home and I'm kind of a little bit resistant feeling like, well, how are they gonna, no, there's no way they're gonna make me use my knives again. There's no way. I'm fine. I'm living my life. I'm not prepping vegetables at home. I'm eating out. I'm getting things that are already pre-cut, pre-made. Don't need to worry. I don't know where the knives are still to this date. They're still gone.
So lots of avoidance.
One of my biggest behaviors was avoidance. So I actually go to do the intake for the assessment to see if it's a fit. So they don't just because the referral is there doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be in this group. So I went to 2 half-day intake assessments because during the first assessment, they weren't sure if this was a fit because some of the overlap was regarding some PTSD. So she wanted to make the most ethical choice, talk to her colleagues and look at my assessment and my results and what I had answered and the charts and all those things. Because there was kind of some really significant overlaps happening. And then she asked me to come back and do the other half. And she did some other stuff and she was like, yeah, it's apparent that the OCD is here. And it's affecting you here in your life still. So they accepted me into the 12-week CBT ERP program. And it was a group setting. So there was other individuals there, which was so powerful. I felt for the very first time a community that I could relate to for the very first time. And it felt very good. It felt like a big hug. I didn't even say one word or anything to these people, and I just knew walking through those doors that something was going to happen in a good way.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. And so the other wonderful thing about it was the 2 clinical psychologists that facilitated treatment. So it wasn't just like group talk and then they would sort of facilitate and guide. It was clinical in the sense that they were there to, I guess, coach us along the way, to challenge us. They said that day one, like OCD is going to, say no to this, right? Their OCD will make you turn the other way and do all these other different things. So our job is to sort of help you challenge that when the OCD is really coming up, right? The resistance is really there. And it made a huge difference because it was a group clinical therapy and it was amazing. I was learning these cognitive skills tools that I was adding to my toolkit, and the language and words and these concepts about exposures and the way that we respond, right, to the beliefs and the misinterpretations of like the OCD thoughts and how much power we give it and how to detach from it and weighing the evidence, It's like learning all of those skills really was just, I remember it was like the 15th floor at College Plaza, and I just remember would gaze out the window, just being like dumbfounded about, wow, it was final, the language was there. Like, this is where it was.
It is like a new language,
It
isn't it?
is. It
Learning
really,
those skills.
Yeah, and they were like, this is so that you can be your own therapist. You have your tools. We're not going to be here after 12 weeks.
Right.
So what are you going to do
Right.
when you're in recovery to continue your journey with, living with OCD and your lived experience?
Yep.
And every single week that I went in, I learned something new. And it was just, again, I was just always so blown away by the way that it was facilitated, how professional it was, how real it was. And when I say real, I mean they practiced after week 5 in-house clinical exposures with us.
Right.
And they actually got me to bring a knife in.
I know. Exposure therapists do knife exposures all the time. So would you permit me to give you a knife so that you can speak to the nature of the exposure?
Yes. So I didn't actually bring in a knife the first time we did the exposure. We broke it down because exposures can be very overwhelming for the person experiencing the OCD. So I started with a picture of this exact knife. A picture of it. And I would just bring it out of my pocket and I would look at it. Okay. And then I would bring in a McDonald's plastic knife.
Okay.
And we started there. We built up to this knife because this was the knife that I did not want anything to do with. And so I remember working up to this exposure, and we worked on parts of the body where would bring me the most anxiety, which was the throat, but we started with the wrist too. And part of it was a script, an imaginal script, as detailed and as vivid as possible. And I started saying it out loud in the mirror by myself, and I would whisper it because I didn't like hearing it out loud. It was very stressful for me to hear, I want to slit your throat. I've always wanted to, see the blood come out of your wrist or your throat. It was things like that. It was like, get as vivid and real and detailed as possible, because if you can do that and really get close and sit beside what scares you the most,
right,
that's going to decrease your subjective units of distress. Right.
So you did 2 kinds of exposures. You did what's called in vivo exposure with a real knife.
Yes.
And then you did imaginal exposure, where you write that story, that screenplay with the dreaded event occurring, no happy endings, and then it's repeat. So it's kind of like poking the bear. It's saying to the OCD, I can go there. I can face the deeper threat. I can face my core fear. And so for the weeks after you were you used the picture, you were building up, and then the therapist is in the room. Did you put the knife to her wrist maybe?
Yes, I did. So we actually, I read my script always, because part of the saying that was hard for me. So we did the script and we did the physical exposure because that was what scared me too, right? And so I remember my script being like, I'm going to slit your throat. And then I kind of got bored with that after a while, right? Because it was like, oh, you know, I still haven't killed my husband. I still haven't killed you. I still haven't killed anybody. I still don't have a desire to kill anybody, right? So I can sit with it. I can go up against the thoughts and the OCD, right? I can walk to the edge, right? And then I was like, something feels like missing. And one of the facilitators was like, say more about that. And I was like, well, it feels like I've always wanted to slit your throat and I always wanted to kill you. Like I've always wanted to was like another layer to it, that when I placed the knife, so of course we didn't use the sharp edge, we would place it on her wrist. And there was something about pressure and the wrist. And when the very first time that I put a knife, whether the plastic one, whatever, it was the anxiety was the same at the beginning versus the plastic knife, or the wooden knife actually, and then the real one. But it was viscerally in my body. It was like I was hotter than the sun. It felt like I was shaking. And she said, keep going. That's good. So I was like, what? And then she was like, look at me. Because I would look away and she would be like, look at me. And she would be like, but why are you looking away? And I was like, because I'm scared that like, if I look at you, it's going to be too real. And it'll be like, I'm going to do it or something. So she said, good, keep looking at me. And she would start her timer. And she would just allow me to just run the knife on her wrist. And she would have her little notes out in her timer. And she said, keep repeating your script. And then I would stall and I would sort of like get slow, or I would start to like look other places. And she would be like, continue, like, look at me, like, continue to, you stopped with the knife. So then because then I would just be like this. And she was like, keep gliding it, like, keep saying that, what is it? Like, what's happening? Like, what is, like, so then I was like, I want to slit your wrist. That's where it started before we got to the throat, right? That was the build up to the exposure. I want to see, the blood coming out of your hand. And just saying blood was hard, because just saying blood, right? I want to see it stain the carpet on the floor, and I want to see your body fall to the ground, and I want your family to know that you're dead, and I'm a bad person. I shouldn't be existing in society. I should be locked away. I'm a monster. Like things like that, right? Then we would go a little bit higher and higher, and then my subjective units of distress would be higher and higher. The more I was able to practice with the pressure on her and say the script out loud, it got easier. But it wasn't just like, oh, and then it was happening and easy. It was like, Kate, stop, I need a break. This is too overwhelming for me. And like, I'm scared, I'm terrified. Like, it was beads of sweat, and it was staring out the 15th floor office window. We went to a separate space when we practiced exposures. And other people in the group, some of with their subtypes, they didn't really need anybody else to practice. So one of the facilitators was really it was so fortunate that I had a facilitator to do my exposure with, because it wouldn't have been the same. It just wouldn't have. And then we would stop and start, and then my anxiety, so she would be like, what are your subjective units of distress? Like a thermometer from 0 to 100, and I'd be like 100. And then we would break after I had done an exposure, and it would be like 50 or something like that. And then she would be like, okay, the break, and that, because I would need it. And then we would start again, and she would say, what are your units like of distress right now? And they'd be up again. So they'd gone down and then they'd gone up. And she was like, that's interesting. So there's some anticipatory, anxiety around starting and stopping. So I invite you over the week. And we had homework, right? It wasn't like, of course, just the session and whatever. There was work to do. And we were to practice our exposures on our own, right? And so I did. So I did what she said. I would start and stop and kind of gauge that a little bit as to like, So then we would practice that starting and stopping, because it would be like this up and down.
Right.
And then we eventually got up here, and that I just was like, okay. As soon as I even got to this part, it's like I felt like I was seeing stars in black. Because it just like the stress was so hard. And when people are resistant to sitting through their fears and their triggers and the situations that scare them the most, this is what it is. This is what it feels like. This is the experience. This is what it is. This is what it is to sit through it and go to the other side.
Yeah.
Right?
This is such challenging and demanding therapy. And, as you described the knife, probably some people watching this would think this is the weirdest thing. But really think about it. You had so much avoidance of the knives. Your lifestyle was changed. You were so afraid. You're probably pushing the thoughts out of your mind, more thought suppression, and you're churning it around and you're facing your fears in real life, like with the knife, and you're reducing your avoidance. You are a remarkable ERP student. Mm-hmm. Remarkable. But can you tell my clients, like what was your motivation? Like, this is hard therapy. Mm-hmm. Some people are just too terrified. Many of my clients are. Like, what would you say to them about, that would motivate them to do ERP therapy around their topic or theme?
I went into it thinking, I'll do anything. And I think a lot of people will say that, even if they are resistant, right? They'll want to do everything in the beginning, right? Like, nobody wants to be experiencing this darkness, this intrusive, terrible illness, right? This disorder, whatever, right? Like, nobody wants to be doing that, or living that. So I just felt like I'll do whatever it takes, because I saw the impact it was having on my job, my ability to create income, because I couldn't work for a while. The isolation, like my room became a prison, because it was the only place that I would feel safe, right? And if I went beyond the borders of that, then, something might happen and I might hurt someone, or it might feel too stressful. And I just remember thinking like I didn't want that life. I knew that, it's not the way to live. And I just, so then I had this thought, well, I'm going to be existing anyways in life, right? So I might as well see what this is all about. And I think that I was really tuned into pushing myself to the edge and that anxiety. And I think for people who you have to kind of go in and go through the fire. Like, you have to sit, you have to get uncomfortable. You have to get uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. It doesn't mean that you're unsafe or your perceived threats are coming to life, right? It just means that you're sort of walking past the fear on either side, and you just get to the other side. And through this therapeutic clinical treatment, I learned that I could go through to the other side. I just explained to you what that was like. And most people who are resistant or not motivated don't get to that point because their distress levels are so high. I think compassion, you must have compassion for yourself, and you have to have an understanding, and you have to believe that you can live a life in recovery, because it's there and it's really beautiful.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing your story. And thank you so much for the book. It's a great book, and it was a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Janet. This was just so wonderful, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to sit down with, you know, an OCD sort of trailblazer. So thank you. Thank you so much.